If you've ever considered the possibility of acquiring or renovating an old camper, particularly a pop-up, this video is for you. Even if you haven't, you might find out something you didn't know about, so stick around and see. And of course, my do-it-yourself portable power station and my 12-volt fridge play a role in this project as well, so if you're interested in applications of those, here you go. Hi, I'm Gary. I'm a retired electrical engineer who makes videos about mostly technology subjects that happen to interest me as a user of such stuff. This video is going to be a bit short on technology and long on do-it-yourself, but it also brings together some stuff from previous videos, so here goes anyway. It's basically about my attempt to resurrect a 36-year-old pop-up camper that was in poor shape. There turned out to be a lot more to that than I anticipated. If you follow this channel regularly, you'll know that I bought a pop-up camper for family camping last year and completely upgraded the electrical system with a lithium battery, an inverter, and a bunch of convenience features. It worked out great. So why go at this again? Well, my son's family is moving away, and they'll be taking that camper with them. My wife decided she's not into pop-up camping, which puts me back to solo camping in my car if I want to spend time in the backcountry. It works, but at my age it's not as much fun as it used to be. So I thought I'd see if I could find a cheap pop-up that I could lug around for the short trips I enjoy on back roads here in Idaho. Pop-up campers are not that popular anymore. So you might wonder why you would choose one over a regular camp trailer, a teardrop trailer, or some kind of off-road something. To me, the expedition campers and teardrops are very expensive for what they do, and you typically can't cook and eat inside them. Also, I lived through one major wreck caused by towing a regular camping trailer on a windy day, and my SUV is frankly a little undersized for something with that much drag and weight. Just don't want to do it. But, you may say, a pop-up camper is basically just a tent on wheels. Why not a tent if you're going to settle for simple and cheap? I'm 82 years old with a bad back. Sleeping on the ground doesn't work for me anymore. And you typically wind up cooking and eating outside with a tent, therefore subject to the weather. Ergo, a pop-up seems the best compromise for me. Maybe not for you. Most of them are lightweight and easy to tow, and their low profile means you can see what's behind you on the highway. The beds fold out, so they have a lot of space relative to their on-the-road size, and you can still have many of the conveniences of a regular camp trailer. However, I don't go camping alone that much, and you may have noticed that RVs in general have become much more expensive in the last few years. A new pop-up generally goes for maybe $20,000 or more. The 25-year-old one I bought last year, which was in pretty good shape for its age, was still $3,000 before I upgraded the electrical system. I only wanted to do this if I could do it cheap. Facebook Marketplace is your friend if you're looking for cheap used stuff. So I haunted it for a month or more, trying to find something for $1,000 or less that wasn't complete junk. Facebook Marketplace is also your enemy if what you find isn't in your immediate area. There weren't any local deals here, so I made offers on 3 or 4 different ones up to 300 miles away. But every time the seller either didn't respond to my offer or sold it to someone else before I could arrange to get there with the cash. Eventually I found this one in Salt Lake City for the grand sum of $550. The price obviously meant it needed a lot of work, but the seller's pictures suggested it could be made usable, so I bought it, towed it home, and set to work figuring out what needed fixing. It consumed well over a month of my time before it was in shape to go anywhere. The rest of this video is mostly going to deal with the issues you could run into with such a project. Obviously, the way I dealt with them was not the only way you could do this, but it might at least give you some ideas. And some of them could also apply if you already have a camper that needs some work. Hope so anyway. Describing what needed to be done with this one is basically the same as describing everything a pop-up camper has to do, so I'll do that instead. First off, its most basic feature is that it has to pop up. You simply can't use it if the top doesn't open. It needs to have usable beds and be sealed against weather and bugs. And it needs to be roadworthy, registered, titled, capable of rolling down the highway. Oh, and it needs to have working lights as well. Smaller pop-ups like this one don't have brakes, so at least that wasn't an issue. I'll try not to spend too much time on these externals, but the owner had a bill of sale and a title in someone else's name, so that took some time to fix. The tires rolled okay, but the rubber was cracking and there was very little grease in the bearings, so I had to replace the tires and grease the wheel bearings for the first time in my life. I'm not a car guy. The previous owner was apparently intending to rewire the lights, so there were wires strung through the trailer, connected to nothing, and wrapped around the drive shaft for the lift system for some unknown reason. But he had mounted new tail lights, so I connected them to the old wiring and they worked fine. The cable that goes from the trailer to the tow vehicle looked like this, but fortunately it plugged into the trailer tongue using this 6-pin connector, so I could buy one and make a new cable to replace it. And boom, it was legal and roadworthy. That was the easy part. On to the popping up bit. The roof was up when I bought it, but when we put it down to tow it home, it didn't go all the way down. And it subsequently wouldn't go back up. I got 4 strong family members to lift it up by brute force, and it more or less started working again. There was a huge amount of friction in the lift system, and the front and back ends didn't go up to the same height. So here's my first lesson learned about pop-ups. You really don't want to buy a Rockwood model older than 1995. This is a 1989 model, and it uses a lift system that was abandoned by the manufacturer in 1994. Modern pop-ups use a cable lift system that's typically exposed underneath, and it's fairly easy to maintain and get parts for. This system is enclosed, hard to access, and there are no parts available for love or money. It's an ingenious design, it's just not fixable if it doesn't work. The lifting crank turns a gear that drives a sprocket that drives a bicycle chain running across the camper to another sprocket. There are 2 springs attached to this chain that push up through the lift tubes at each corner and raise the roof. Now, you don't generally use springs to push things, but if you enclose them in a tube, they can even turn corners like this. The chain mechanism itself is mostly inside a steel enclosure. There's one of these chain/spring drives in each end of the camper, and they're connected by a drive shaft. That does let you adjust the front and the back separately, but the whole thing is difficult to lubricate, impossible to clean, and fairly worn. I found a company that makes a manual lift system that you can install on the outside of a pop-up camper, but it takes a pretty large amount of effort to use, and it cost as much as I paid for this camper. So my solution is to lube this one where I could and live in hope that it holds together for a few more years. The other external issues were mostly related to keeping out the weather and the bugs. There were holes and rips in the canvas, holes in the screen, and tears in the plastic windows. Also, the Velcro used all over the place had disintegrated. Fortunately, you can buy patching materials for canvas and screens that's self-adhesive, and clear Gorilla Tape turns out to work for the plastic windows. But there were some big rips along the bed frames where whole chunks of the canvas had to be replaced. And there were yards and yards of Velcro that wouldn't stick to anything anymore. It's theoretically possible to remove all the canvas and repair it using a sewing machine, or even replace it if you have a spare $1,500 or so, but that was too big a project for me to be interested in. So I wound up doing something like 80 feet of hand stitching using this Speedy Stitcher, which is made for things like repairing sails. A piece of advice about that: don't buy a cheap Chinese awl. Ask me how I know that. This was well worth the $20 or so it cost, but it still took me 15 to 20 hours and a few holes in my fingers for the stitching. We re-weatherproofed it after all the repairs and tested it with no obvious leaks, so fingers crossed there. And there was one more big issue I didn't find until I actually took it on the road. The roof vent, obviously a replacement, was installed backward so that it opened up and became a big air scoop when driving down the highway. It had to be taken out and reinstalled, after which the lifting mechanism broke. Ugh. For the record, this was the most dismal-looking camper interior you can imagine when I bought it. Some previous owner painted all the interior a really dark blue, covered all the cushions, including the beds, in black cloth, and covered the counters and tables and such in black contact paper. It looked like the inside of a hearse. With some help from my wife, we repainted it all, and I rebuilt the bench seat that was rotting away and covered over some disintegrating plywood panels. It's no showplace, but it doesn't look like something from a horror movie anymore. Here's a picture of all the various repair, maintenance, and refinishing materials I wound up using. If anybody actually wants to know about these, leave me a comment and I'll provide links to them. I did skip over one bit of technology that was a big help on the externals. This camper has a two-piece door, and the two halves fit together using some plastic pegs that keep them aligned. They're very flimsy. They shear in half easily, and the ones you can buy are really expensive. But I had a secret resource. My brother-in-law is heavily into 3D printing. You may remember that from the video I made several months ago on the subject. He has a good friend who does 3D modeling. So I sent them one of the broken ones, and he made me some much more solid new ones. The plastic caps that seal the corners of the roof were also mostly broken, and replacements for them are non-existent. So I also sent him one of those, and he made me some new ones, using a new filament material he was testing that has carbon fiber in it. Another win for 3D printing. I'm looking forward to getting my own 3D printer set up and working, because this kind of thing is incredibly helpful when working with old stuff. Finally, we get to the part that I was expecting to have to deal with. What features does a pop-up camper need to be convenient, or at least useful? Your list may be different from mine, but for my needs there are basically 4. One is a convenient source of water, some way to cook food, some way to keep food cold, some way to warm the place up. I don't do cold weather camping, but it's pretty much always cool in the morning in Idaho. As it happens, the camper I bought does only one of these things. It has a water tank, a hand pump, and a sink. That's it. Actually, that's not quite true. It has a propane tank and lines, but nothing to connect to it. I knew all that when I bought it, but I wasn't too worried about it, because I had a camp stove, a 12-volt portable refrigerator, and a propane heater that someone gave me. No problems, right? Not exactly. The water tank filler had disintegrated and needed to be re-engineered and the tank moved. My one-burner butane stove was okay for somebody like me who only does one-pot meals, although I have now found a drop-in one to replace it. It's not installed yet. But the heater was designed to sit on top of a 20-pound propane bottle. Not exactly what you want in the aisle beside your bed. So I found a used catalytic heater online that's one of the few that includes a fan. We'll see how that works after our current heat wave is over. That leaves the cold food part. If I want to use my 12-volt fridge inside the camper instead of in my car as I have in the past, there obviously has to be 12-volt power available. This camper came with a rusty but working old power converter, which doesn't help because I don't typically camp anywhere with electrical hookups. And it had an empty battery box intended to power the interior lights. I could have simply put a battery in it. But there are also no 12-volt outlets in the camper, so there still wouldn't have been anywhere to plug in the fridge. Since I recently built a do-it-yourself portable power station using a lithium iron phosphate battery, see the video above if you're interested, the simplest solution was to use it in the camper, and in fact that's what I did. The battery box was removed and replaced by some wooden spacers that keep the power station from sliding around, and the cable that formerly connected to the old battery for the inside lights now has a 12-volt plug on it. Plug it and the fridge into the two 12-volt outlets on the power station, and I'm up and running. And of course I can lift the power station out and use it elsewhere anytime. Did that work? Of course not. The fridge was fine because it plugged directly into the power station. But the old battery wiring was a jumbled mess and it didn't work. Turns out the battery wiring for this camper doesn't go to a 12-volt bus like a modern one does. It goes into the power converter, where a switch allows you to choose either the battery or the power converter to run the lights. There's no battery charger in this power converter. And the chosen output then goes through a front panel fuse that was missing the fuse retainer to hold it in place. So, no 12 volts to the camper wiring. The fuse problem turned out to be a senior moment on my part. After wasting some time fabricating a really crude wooden retainer for the fuse, I found the original one on my workbench in a pile of junk that came out of the camper right after I bought it. I had no idea what it was at the time. And if your workbench looked like this during a project, you'd probably lose it too. But the rat's nest of wiring still had to go. It had redundant fuses, unconnected wires, and a general lack of anything that made sense from looking at it. Miraculously, I found the original wiring diagram in an online manual and marked it up with wire colors and actual connections. This is my lazy man's wiring diagram for the result. I added a fuse distribution panel to handle both the power and ground connections for the 12-volt circuits. The fuse panel also gave me a place to add one of these panel-mounted USB charging ports right next to it. What I haven't done yet is add one or more 12-volt receptacles in the camper itself, so I don't have to run wires across the floor to the power station. But that got the interior lights working. Oops. At least it did after I connected the battery ground wire I had overlooked. Always double-check your work. The light bulbs are now LEDs for lower power consumption. So I finally ground my way through the list of things that really needed to be done to this marvel to get it back on the road. I still have a list of possible improvements, but it's usable. I just came back from a 3-day backcountry shakedown run with it, and I'm pleased to say that pretty much everything worked. I found a few more things needing fixing and broke a couple more, but I can use it for more camping this summer, which was my major goal. Was it worth it, you ask? I think it was, in that it meets my needs. Counting all the repair materials and parts, it's roughly an $1,100 investment, which is about what I set out to spend. It could easily accommodate more people, so it's relative luxury for one person. It even has a nice little niche for a portable toilet, which is a big deal at my age. Obviously, if I valued my time highly for doing the renovation, it might be another story. But I'm retired, and I was more or less having fun doing it. Your mileage may vary. However, I would highly suggest that you count the cost before you start a project like this, because there will be unexpected issues to be overcome. If you stuck this out to the end, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, a like would be appreciated. If not, you know what to do. Comments are welcome, and please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't. There will be more videos, even if I can't say exactly when. I am not a full-time YouTuber, so stuff kind of has to happen to me before I have more material. And of course, you're welcome to ask questions or suggest ideas. I'll do what I can. Thanks again.